In recent days, Typhoon 9 Saola and Typhoon 11 Haikui have made successive landfalls along China's southeastern coast, unleashing heavy rains that have ravaged Fujian and Guangdong provinces. Urban areas are now submerged underwater, and in the rural areas, vast stretches of farmland have been inundated, with crops facing a total loss. Earlier, Typhoon Doksuri and Kanu severely impacted agriculture in the northeastern provinces, which are known as China's grain storehouses, increasing risk of flood shortage for the Chinese population. Heavily reliant on food imports, any reduction could potentially lead to hunger for about 20% of the population. The nation's grain shortage has also unveiled significant issues of corruption and poor decision-making within the CCP.
你学完了，我们五常农民的靠天吃饭，这不？现在正是水稻抽穗的关键时期，淹2天就完蛋了。这一年的，
这是网友拍摄到洪水来袭冲倒庄稼的画面，这场景你见过吗？视频素材来自哪个省份已经无法得知，不过可以肯定的是，这是今年7月发生在北方农村的画面。有人说是水库放水导致，还有人说是强降雨汇聚形成。不管哪一种，看着辛苦种下的庄稼被冲倒，都难免让人心疼。
远看河一条，近看是稻苗。昨日此地刚阳肥，全家出动钱花没。持续干旱龙王怒，电闪雷鸣没收住。夜里大雨来参观，没控制住田来淹。家底干没上哪儿告？那真是旱涝交替来人间，种地糊口真是难。俗话说，人定能胜天，是谁在瞎编？人类斗不过大自然。
安庆县它与洪水情况还是比较严重的，影响不小吧。玉米淹的多，淹的有几万亩甚至更多吧。山药啊，这个红薯啊、药材啊淹了，反正也有个几万亩。高邮县这边也被淹了，都在同一个行动区之内。其他瓜果蔬菜被淹的也有，包括大棚也有被淹的。这水臭气参透也没办法抢救了。
According to official statistics from the Chinese government, at the end of July, Typhoon Doksuri alone affected 108,000 hectares of crops in Fujian province, with 457 hectares facing total loss. The crop damage in Hebei, Henan, Beijing, and the 3 northeastern provinces is even more extensive. Northeast China, acclaimed as the country's grain storehouse, contributes to over 1/5 of the nation's total grain production. Primarily consisting of soybeans, corn, and rice, the double whammy from Typhoon Doksuri and Kanu on the north, coupled with agriculture flood discharge, has led to immeasurable crop losses, potentially igniting a catastrophic grain shortfall, putting China's billion-strong population at risk of food shortages. The subsequent Typhoon Saola and the recent Haikui have inflicted immense damage on the southern farmlands, grain reserves, economy, and daily life of the Chinese. After the destruction caused by these 4 major typhoons across the mainland, from north to the south, the anticipated harvest season might witness a large reduction in yield or even no yield. Currently, the Chinese authorities maintain a veil of secrecy, with instances of non-reporting exacerbating the devastation from this monumental disaster. In recent times, flood security has escalated to become a critical issue on the global stage. Influenced by climatic fluctuations, international grain prices have soared rapidly, rocketing to a 12-year high. In July, India enforced the strictest grain export restrictions in history. As a leading exporter of rice globally, accounting for 40% of the world's total rice exports annually, these measures have a significant impact. Following India's implementation of grain export restrictions, nations like Russia and the UAE have announced similar curb on rice exports. Despite not imposing export restrictions, primary rice exporters like Vietnam and Thailand have adjusted their export prices in response to the rice price surge. The United States has even introduced rice purchasing limits. According to data as of September 4th, the FOB price for Vietnamese rice with a 5% broken rate has escalated to $645 per ton. This is a substantial increase of 40% for $460 per ton at the start of the year. As of the end of August, the latest quotation for Thai 100% B-grade rice stood at $657 per ton, soaring by 31% from $504 per ton at the start of the year. These indicate a continual upward trend in international rice prices and will undoubtedly impact the cost of grain in China. Amid rising tensions in China's international relations, President Xi Jinping recently led a Central Financial and Economic Affairs Commission meeting centered on food security issues. During the meeting, he proposed strengthening the food supply chain to reduce reliance on imported food, particularly the dependence on imports from the United States. Some netizens speculate that the Chinese Communist Party's initiative to lessen its reliance on international food imports is a strategy to prevent potential food sanctions from other nations. In response to their alleged plans to attack Taiwan, this action would be in breach of international peace commitments. Hence, the aim is to firmly hold the rice bowl in its own hands. Despite the CCP's ambitious plan to reduce reliance on international food imports, achieving complete independence from the global food market seems virtually impossible, given that the nation constitutes about 1/5 of the world's population. Historical data concerning China's international food imports reveal that the country has consistently been at the forefront, ranking either first or second globally. In 2021, China reached a historical peak in grain imports. Although there was a slight dip in 2022, the overall trend shows a growing demand for international food products. In the first 2 months of 2023, both the volume and price of soybean imports surged to new heights, with an increase of 396,000 tons. The import rate of soybeans constitute 95% of the total consumption in China. According to the data released by the General Administration of Customs in July this year, soybean imports in May amounted to 10.2 million tons, marking a 24% increase year-on-year, setting a new monthly record. China's heavy reliance on oil and soybean meals for feed highlights the gravity of the situation, with some netizens making the remark, this is even more severe than a semiconductor bottleneck. Numbers from China's National Bureau of Statistics indicate that the Chinese diet is heavily centered on carbohydrates, with an average annual consumption of 500 kilograms per person. Based on these figures, in 2022, China's grain production amounted to 686 million tons, with imports reaching 146 million tons. This suggests that approximately 21% of the population depends on imported food, and any reduction could potentially lead to hunger for about 20% of the population, inevitably driving up food prices. This summer, China witnessed severe climate disasters affecting domestic food security, with brutal assaults from typhoons and floods wreaking havoc on crop yields. This has brought about the Chinese government's recent emphasis on ensuring food security, which indirectly substantiates the looming crisis in China's food safety landscape. Data indicates that after the flood of Zhouzhou County, around 2.9 hectares, or approximately 7.2 acres, of agricultural land were affected. Following serious floods in Heilongjiang province, several cities experienced extensive damage to farmlands, ranging from 7,600 acres in Haicheng City to 70,000 acres in Wuchang City. In Fujian province, the crop damage area spanned 10,800 hectares, with 457 hectares witnessing total loss. These figures omit other severely and moderately affected areas like Henan province and Beijing, as well as cities not mentioned in online reports. Beyond the reliance on international food imports and the impacts of climate disasters, the greatest challenge to China's food security are limited self-sufficiency and inadequate arable land. Despite the Chinese government and state media annually proclaiming bumper harvest and increasing total production, data from the General Administration of Customs illustrates a persistent rise in net imports, which are exceeding hundreds of millions of tons annually. Furthermore, China's food self-sufficiency rate has been hitting new lows, decreasing from 94% in 2000 to 66% in 2020. Currently, imported grains comprise about 1/4 of China's total grain production. In mainland China, the primary reason for low grain yields are high production cost and a lack of incentives to motivate farmers to cultivate grains. Online discussions reveal the financial struggles of farmers, with images circulating showing the summer harvest of a family in Huaibei, 1.6 acres yielding approximately 4,350 kilograms of wheat, a small mountain's worth, sold at a local purchase price of 0.9 yuan per half kilo, giving a revenue of 7,830 yuan, around $1,066. After deducting the cost of pesticides, 300 yuan, fertilizers, 850 yuan, hiring harvesting machinery, 550 yuan, and seeds, 400 yuan, the net profit amounted to 5,730 yuan, which is $780. The earnings from the summer crop corn were roughly similar, summing up to an annual net income of just about 10,000 yuan. That is $1,360, falling below the minimum wage standard in China. In recent times, experts have shed light on the reasons why the youth are reluctant to take up farming.
The young generation of farmers simply do not want to work the fields. Why is that, you may ask? The reason is quite straightforward. Farming is not lucrative. In our country, with 288 million acres of arable land and over 200 million small farming households, each possessing less than 1.6 acres of land, making a living is a daunting task, particularly when cultivating grains. 1.6 acres yields less than 10,000 yuan annually, and that includes the operational costs. This economic strain forces many farmers to question the viability of agriculture, especially grain cultivation. A decade ago, half kilo of grain was worth slightly over a yuan, and its price has barely changed. Meanwhile, the costs of fertilizers and pesticides have surged. This scenario, coupled with restrictions on crop varieties in primary grain-producing regions, has left many farmers with negligible income, prompting some to abandon farming altogether, as the profits hardly offset the cost.
Moreover, the scarcity of arable land poses a significant barrier to increasing China's grain production. To secure the nation's food supply, the Chinese government has initiated movements such as reverting forests to farmland and stabilizing grain and ensuring supply. In their pursuit to expand arable land, local governments have undertaken extreme measures, including the demolition of newly built commercial zones, as witnessed in Chengdu. Areas reforested in the past 2 decades under the Returning Farmland to Forest initiative aimed at combating soil erosion are now being cleared for agriculture, regardless of tree type or age. This has sparked concerns and claims of infringing farmers' rights. Many years ago, under the Returning Farmland to Forest policy, the CCP mandated the transformation of numerous agricultural land into forest, often without proper suitability assessment. Now, in the eyes of the public, they are backtracking on their initial policy and forcing the conversion back to farmland.
Friends, here we are at the epicenter of the reverting forests to farmland initiative. Corn has already been planted here, replacing what was recently a dense forest. Soon, this pine tree will be cut down for phase 2. Consider what else can be cultivated here. Perhaps it's time for rice to be cultivated on the mountains. I have 21 acres of nursery here, primarily planted with Chinese ash and locust trees. All will be cleared this autumn, leaving nothing behind. These trees, with diameters ranging between 10 to 12 centimeters, will be chopped down as part of the reversion to farmland. We can't resist this, but compensation discussions are underway.
To avoid the appearance of reversing their initial stance, Chinese officials have refrained from admitting the implementation of the reverting forest to farmland policy, insisting that this terminology is a distortion propaganded by social media. According to the CCP, the policy promoted is actually reform and resuming farmland cultivation. As a result, they are accused of playing word games with the Chinese public and also shifting blame onto social media. Regarding the increase in arable lands in China, renowned independent economic analyst Cai Shengkun voiced his concerns. Chinese agriculture has remained a smallholder sector unable to transition to large-scale land management, leading to stagnant agriculture output and higher operating costs compared to international markets. This has restrained the potential earnings of Chinese farmers, often resulting in losses. The government's choice to expand arable land through inefficient policies to boost agriculture yield indicates a lack of alternatives and undermines efforts to reduce dependence on imports. Assistant Professor Lai Rongwei from Taiwan Longhua University of Science and Technology also expressed his apprehension, noting that the administrative approach to significantly increase arable land not only fails to improve China's economic environment and food supply, but also evokes the shadow of Mao Zedong, the founding leader of the Communist Party and initiator of the Great Leap Forward. Lai remarked, "The massive steel production campaign during that time mobilized numerous farmers who should have been cultivating lands to produce a significant amount of useless iron instead." The urgency of food crisis in China is becoming increasingly evident, as reflected in the Chinese Communist Central Committee No. 1 document, which has mentioned food security progressively more each year, indicating a growing crisis. Contrary to the continuous claims of bountiful harvest by the China National Bureau of Statistics and official media, the real threat to the Chinese people's food security stems from the fabrication and misinterpretation of data concerning China's grain reserves. In 2020, there were already reports from the public in China indicating a significant issue arising in the country's grain reserves.
The government has paid you to store these grains, and this is what it has turned into, spending several thousand yuan for storing over 10 million grains, almost reaching 2,000 yuan per ton. Are we buying spoiled grains? The people managing the grain stores have personally admitted that they are storing spoiled grains. All friends who are selling grains should know about the water-soaked grains here in Zhaozhou County, Daiqing City last year. It smells sour. When you stored it, was this residue sifted through in the warehouse? Wasn't the residue supposed to be taken back in the truck? How did it appear in the grain warehouse? Over 20 kilograms of residue. Look at the row of footprints there. The workers walk around and cover the top layer of grains to hide all the spoiled ones. Since June 25th, only 8 tons of corn were loaded on the first day, followed by 17 tons the next day. 4 trucks arrived on the 25th to transport the grains. One of the trucks left empty. I accepted that. I was charged 100 yuan for each truck to park. I accepted that too. Then they asked for an additional fee, initially an extra 2 yuan for every 50 tons of grain transported, which I accepted too, but then they demanded an extra 50 yuan for the next truck.
As the years 2020, 2021, and 2022 passed, even in this year, incessant relations of corruption and embezzlement among Chinese Communist Party officials in grain storage management have surfaced. The true state of China's grain reserve and the discrepancy between official figures released to the world and the actual stockpiles are deeply concerning.
Strict investigation into the big rats in the grain reserves, severely eroding the interests of the masses. Recently, the Central Commission for Discipline Inspection and the National Supervisory Commission publicly reported 10 typical cases of disciplinary and legal violations in the field of grain purchase and sale. These party officials and cadres, who were supposed to fulfill their duties responsibly and bear the important responsibility of safeguarding national grain security, have exploited their positions to seek personal gains, severely harming the interests of the masses, causing losses to the nation, and affecting food security. Here are some of the main methods of corruption. The first is circle grain, referring to the acquisition of undue benefits through fictitious buying and selling, using stationary stockpile and ledger circulation, or both, during the execution of state policy grain procurement and reserve grain rotation. For instance, the former general manager of Qingshan County State Grain Management Company in Sichuan colluded with grain merchants to sell 1,276 tons of old grain and repurchase 896 tons of it as new grain, profiting 200,000 yuan. The second air grain and upgraded version of circle grain involves fabricating grain purchase and sale transactions out of thin air between grain warehouses and merchants or within the warehouse itself. The third excess grain refers to the concealment and unauthorized sale of surplus generated in the processes of grain purchase, storage, transportation, and release, which should have been documented in inventory records, thus embezzling grain funds. For instance, the former chairman of Zhenjiang Grain and Oil Purchase and Sale Company in Fujian County, Henan, privately sold the surplus grain, embezzling 57,000 yuan. Another method is cheating farmers' grain, occurring during the process of purchasing grain from farmers, wherein some individuals adopt dishonest tactics such as underreporting weights, downgrading quality, delaying payment, and inflating the percentages of moisture, impurities, and mold to cheat and harm farmers acquiring illicit gains. For example, the former station master of Chenji Grain Station of Yizang City Grain Purchase and Sales Company in Jiangsu exploited the price difference by settling with farmers for third-class grain and selling it as second-class grain, netting over 100,000 yuan. Additionally, there is loss grain, where individuals pocket funds by fabricating grain losses, and price difference grain, where profits are made through illegal reselling and buying low and selling high.
Every year, numerous officials are exposed, releasing videos expressing their remorse.
I myself did not treat the national food security well. Driven by personal greed, I neglected the nation's food security and engaged in fraudulent activities, causing great harm to the national grain safety. After being caught, I realized the true value of freedom and health, especially freedom, which I deeply regret now. Unfortunately, life does not offer a second chance.